Good morning and salam alaikum. Welcome to our webinar, 1 year after the fall. What are the prospects for a political process in Afghanistan? My name is Lisa Schirch, and I am a professor here at the University of Notre Dame's Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. This webinar is part of a series of events and research initiatives that we are hosting as part of our Afghan Peace and Development Research Program. And the link to the webpage for our program is going to be posted in the chat, so you can link and see what our other events will be this fall. Our program is working to host a series of public and private dialogues on the future of Afghanistan to explore options for an inclusive future where all Afghans, including women and minority groups, have an opportunity to participate in decisions that affect their lives and to live with civil rights and freedoms. I'll pass the floor now to my colleague Arif Dostiar, who along with Nilofar Sakhi are providing leadership to our program here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Schirch, for your remarks and the kind introduction. Greetings to our distinguished panelists and to those who are participating or watching this panel. Much has happened in Afghanistan since August 2021. Significantly weakened state institutions are unable to provide basic services to the public. Most private sector businesses remain partially closed or operate below full capacity, according to a recent World Bank statement. Gross human rights violations, particularly women's rights abuses, are reported almost daily. Although they may be in initial stages of formation, armed opposition in Afghanistan exists. The presence of Zawahiri in Kabul before his reported death in July shows that Al-Qaeda is sheltered in Afghanistan. Of course, the Taliban deny all these realities and continue to cement their victory. Today, we will discuss what these and other developments over the past year mean for the future of Afghanistan. We have with us an experienced and well-respected group of speakers. Taib Jawad is former ambassador of Afghanistan to the US, UK, and most recently to Russia. He has also served in a number of other high-level posts in the former government of Afghanistan. Ambassador Jawad has been at Harvard University as a diplomat in residence and was a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University. He's an author, a poet, and a diplomat. Nilofar Sakhi is a visiting fellow at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, Peace Accords Matrix, and a lecturer at George Washington University, among her other important affiliations. With a PhD in conflict analysis and resolution from George Mason University, Dr. Sakhi has written extensively on Afghanistan affairs in the past 2 decades. Dr. Malik Setez is a professor of political science and a well-known researcher in law and international relations. He has published several books and numerous articles in the political, legal, and philosophical fields. He has worked closely on Afghanistan for the past 2 decades. Annie Pforzheimer is former acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Afghanistan and former US Deputy Chief of Mission in Kabul. She is currently an adjunct professor at the City University of New York. She's a non-resident associate with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a commentator, and an advocate on foreign policy matters. A warm welcome to you all. Ambassador Jawad, I would like to pose the first question to yourself. The Taliban took over Kabul in August last year. Ever since, their regime seems to operate under the assumption that other factions will resign to their exclusive hold on power. What are the political developments over the past year? What will be the impact of these developments on the future of the country? To you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Schirch and Mr. Dostiar, and I apologize for some of the technical glitches. I'm honored to be part of this distinguished panel, and I am grateful to Kroc Institute and Notre Dame University for providing me this opportunity. Yes, Mr. Dusser, you're right. Taliban not only actually assume that Afghan will submit to their will, but they kind of require all Afghan parties, political leaders and groups to submit to their will, to perform a bayat, what they called, to the Emirates. But that's not what happened in the past year. And if we try to summarize actually in a short time, the recent development, we can put it in two categories, internally and externally. Internally, as you've indicated, Afghanistan faces deep political, economic, social, and humanitarian crisis. Afghans are facing grave humanitarian violation, poverty, repression, depression, and uncertainty. And the slogan of a change Taliban 2.0 did not materialize. Their decrease, their behavior is as draconian as it was before. In the past year, there was absolute disregard for rule of law in the country. There were arbitrary detention of women activists, forced disappearance, forced displacement, punishment of members of the security forces, and many other extrajudicial acts that have taken place. And you have rightfully indicated the death of Ayman al-Zawahiri and other classified operations that are taking place shows that Taliban are unable or unwilling to distance themselves from their jihadi brothers like Al-Qaeda, TTP, and Central Asian terrorist organization. And also last year proved that Taliban are not yet serious about engaging in a meaningful way with other political leaders and groups in Afghanistan to form a political solution and consensus in the country. And furthermore, Taliban inability to deliver services in the rural area, particularly in the light of famine and poverty and flood, even distanced actually is more conservative element on the countryside that were assumed to be Taliban sympathizer. They are also taking stronger stand against Taliban on delivery of the services and also on education of girls and other issues. Internationally, what happened in the past year? Well, the assumption in the US and the EU was that the Taliban are here to stay. So and the argument was that we're not happy with them, but let's try to change their behavior. Some wrongfully argued that the Taliban brutality will force Afghan to submission. Some other naively believed that Pakistan, China, Russia, or Iran will fund the Taliban operation and thereby change their behavior. It did not happen. It did not work. There's a mutual disappointment between Taliban and their international and regional backers, including close backers in the region that I served, like Russia and Pakistan, even Iran and many others. And furthermore, Taliban could not bridge their differences, their internal disagreements. The old tribal lines between the Kandaharis and Afghanis persist. The new ethnic tension between Hazaras, Uzbek, and Tajik and Pashtun Taliban is re-emerging. Struggle started over control of the resources at the government and provincial level. Most importantly, government is now trying to centralize the processing and trafficking of the narcotics and the revenue collected thereby, which will put them actually in conflict with drug lords who usually funded Taliban, not the other way around, that Taliban will help them. They're reversing that equation by centralizing actually processing and trafficking and prohibiting actually technically production. That means that now everybody needs a permission from Taliban to cultivate, produce, and traffic. And that put them at odds with traditional traffickers who are in much stronger financial position than the Taliban themselves. So we also seeing a disruption of the revenue stream, both legal and illegal, part of it international assistance, part of it local trafficking, local mining. There's been a disruption because the new leaders of the Taliban are trying to gain more, a bigger portion of those revenues. And also the shift from Kabul to a more antisocial, kind of reclusive Amir in Kandahar has made Taliban more unpredictable. It make it very difficult for us outside, Afghans or non-Afghans, to decipher the decision-making process of Taliban. That is a process that is making issues much more difficult, even for those who have some sympathy for Taliban. And ignorance of basic governance and inability to deliver services, as I mentioned, is antagonizing their traditional bases on the countryside that were presumed to, that they will be more sympathizing to Taliban, and that is changing. So quickly, just to what is the impact of this development on near-term and mid-term? Internally, even the apologists and sympathizers of the Taliban are becoming disappointed with them, as much as the regional and international partners are becoming disappointed. Armed resistance, as you indicated, Mr. Dossier, has started. Civil disobedience continues despite the draconian measures the Taliban are taking. Few Afghans that have returned to Afghanistan hoping for cabinet positions or important roles in the government are selling their properties and are basically leaving back. They are not. They have not given any opportunity to participate in the government. And so the best that Taliban can offer is come here, submit to our will, and we let you live. But that's basically it. That's the extent of the amnesty that they are proposing. And Afghans continue to migrate in large number to Iran, Pakistan, in the West. And internationally, quickly, some still try to change their behavior. US, Pakistan, Russia, China, and Uzbekistan are kind of in forefront of these efforts to continue to be tolerant and continue to engage, hoping that they change their behavior. We see a more hostile attitude by Tajikistan, which took a stronger stand from the beginning. Iran is also moving more in confronting Taliban than cooperating with them. And of course, European Union and the European Union countries, because of the human rights issue, they always had a strong stand on Taliban. So I'll end it here, and then I'll be more than happy to discuss any of these issues in detail if needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sakhi Saib, Ambassador Jawad, for those comprehensive remarks. I think you touched on a number of important issues that we will be discussing throughout the discussion today. I just want to make a quick announcement that for those who would like to ask their questions, our respected audience can post their questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. And Lisa will collect them and we will ask those questions from the panelists at the second half of the conversation. Let me pick up on the issue of engagement that Ambassador you discussed. And I would like to look at engagement both at the national intra-Afghan level and then at the regional and global levels. And I would like to ask on the national level from Dr. Sakhi, there have been some attempts to get business communities, the civil society, and other segments of the Afghan people to engage with the Taliban. And of course, we are told and we see that a number of business companies, for example, have continued to operate. Some civil society organizations, including media stations, have negotiated to stay open. Dr. Sakhi, what types and levels of engagement among Afghans with the Taliban have taken place? And can these engagements be entry points to a broader interaction with the regime, or do these interactions actually strengthen the Taliban and hurt the process? What is your assessment?
Thank you, Mr. Dostiar. But let me give a little bit of context before framing my statement about the question that you posed. Well, with the Taliban takeover, there is a new system in place, and Republic was replaced by a totalitarian system. And why I call it totalitarian system, because from last 1 year, the characteristics of the Taliban regime and governance indicates that this is a total authoritative system, and of course, related very much to a very hard totalitarianism. So but the first 5 months of the Taliban takeover, they had a strategy of suppressing a segment of society. And that segment was progressive, civil society activists, women rights advocates, human rights defenders, journalists, and particularly rights defenders, minorities like Hazaras and some portions of Tajik community as well. So that was a strategy to suppress them. And we have seen, and there are facts, data that shows that, for example, if intellectuals, they appear in media, they detain them. If journalists try to reflect on the realities on the ground, the Taliban detain them. The women protesters were suppressed and detained. And there were lots of reports from the ground, though there was an era of misinformation, but again, there were still facts and reports that highlighted that the strategy was to suppress that segment of society. So there was no engagement at that point with the Afghans, particularly with that progressive segment of society, because that is very natural in an authoritarian system. I mean, authoritative system, they do that when they take power and they are in the consolidation process. One of the major tactics is to suppress that part of population. And I think they did it within 5 to 6 months. And that, what happened with that? That created fear among the population in large. I was in contact with many of my former colleagues, friends, students from Kabul, who they try to limit their movement and they try to change their lifestyles even based on that level of fear that they had from all those detention and suppression of the Taliban. So that already created a context of fear among the population. And then the progressives, they were not able to move the way they used to act and react during the Republic. And with the civil society, the other segment of the society that I personally was engaged with so much during the last 20 years, that many of the human rights organizations, many of the civil society organizations who used to work for the rule of law, for the freedom of expression, for the women and human rights, they closed their offices initially within the 7 or 8 months. So there was no interaction with them too. And then there was a small segment, which is still open, by the way, and which restarted after 7 or 8 months. And they had to change the strategy of their organizations. So, for example, we have reports that Taliban entered in some of the civil society organization, and they asked them to submit their strategic goals or work plan of the year. And then they asked them to change that. So by changing means that they had to remove the advocacy component. They had to remove the women rights component, women political participation, human rights advocacy, freedom of expression. So they have to actually remove all those elements from their strategies and replace them by something that Taliban wanted. So in a nutshell, what is happening right now with that segment of society, with the civil society organizations that we call them, that's confined to humanitarian organizations. So their task is only to distribute aid and basic services, and that's all. I mean, that at least based on what I have been interacting with many on the ground. And women, most of the women and girls who used to work as a field officers, they are not allowed to go, especially in some provinces. It differs province to province, but in most of the provinces, Taliban entered the civil society organizations, non-governmental organization, and they stopped those activities where women used to go alone to the field and conduct surveys and programs and other activities, especially trainings as well. So those programs are no more there. Programs are very much confined to the humanitarian aid. Overall, the space is extremely limited for the advocates. In many provinces, they cannot even raise their voice. And even if they are, I recently received call from a number of women who Taliban wanted them to report about their activities, and they had to share all their data with the Taliban in order for the Taliban to follow what they have been doing. So there is restrictions on the civil society sector. Coming to the business sector that you highlighted, Mr. Dostiar. Well, investments are not happening at large for obvious reason: lack of security, lack of instability. There are issues that people don't see, and of course, lack of a legitimized government. And that is again that loses trust of the current regime, and therefore there's no investment at this point by the business community that used to happen in the past. Though there are some projects internally, business projects that in the shape of income generating small projects for women and for men, mostly, as I have heard, some initiated by non-governmental organization, international organization. But again, those programs are very limited to certain portion of a society, and they are not having any extension outside. So that sector is also kind of dead at this point. It's not really something substantial is not happening in that sector also. Again, as I said, because of the many political reasons that and safety and security of the people are also concerned. So overall, the situation is grim, and there's a perception that the Taliban regime has closed the doors for the progressive, for the business community, and for the civil society to emerge and grow. This is not only a perception that something it is there, but this is the reality, unfortunately, and that goes back to many factors, especially the political factors that are laid down. On the other hand, and let's not forget, there's no money too, right? There's no money inside the country for any business development at this point. And the development by itself is not happening because the whole focus is on the humanitarian aspect of Afghanistan to address the humanitarian crisis. So there's not much money in the development sector. On the other hand, Taliban draconian regime also adds and fuel that closed society that they started. And now to the other question that you raised about the relationship with outside, Taliban.
Well, I will come back to you on that, Nilofar. John, thank you. I think that you are pointing again a number of issues, particularly that there is no really meaningful engagement and there is no balance in the relationship between these people who are engaging, and they are told what to do and so forth. And I would like to talk about, maybe seek your insight on the conditions that we need in order to make such a process possible. But before that, let me come to you, Annie. The US administration, perhaps caught by a dilemma, has hidden behind what's called a pragmatic engagement with the Taliban regime. What do you think is the result of this engagement over the past year? And what do you think the objectives are as we move forward?
Sure. Thank you so much. And I'm really, as everyone said, very pleased to be on this important panel. I'll say four things about it. First of all, why would the U.S. engage? As diplomats, the idea is that you want a channel to discuss problems that is not a public one, and that if anything begins to change, affords the possibility to explore any possible areas of confluence, agreement. This is a normal requirement if you want to move to something new with an adversary. And so the US government is reluctant to give up this channel just in case something better can be achieved. And if they do give it up, or in some way very publicly cut it off, then it might require quite a bit of political capital to open it again. So that's sort of, I think, what is behind the thought process now. But the second thing I'll say is another thing that is behind that thought process, to my way of thinking, is a little bit of a delusion of acting as if nothing had changed with respect to the US status in the world. For example, the Twitter account that the Special Representative Tom West uses is the same one that was opened for Ambassador Khalilzad 4 years ago, and it still says that that person is leading the U.S. government effort to facilitate dialogue and negotiations that will bring peace to Afghanistan. And it feels entirely wrong to put that as the justification. Among other things, we are not today, the US government, what we were 4 years ago in terms of our ability to leverage. And the fact that we have no troops on the ground leaves us with the distinction of simply being the largest aid contributor. But in no other way, I think, do we truly have some kind of clout to bring to bear. Still, the US government has met with senior Taliban leadership on a more or less every other month tempo, starting with last October. And there was an interruption in March, but it has continued, and the last one was in the margins of the Uzbek-led dialogue at the end of July. And there are about 8 things that get discussed: humanitarian aid and interference, the issue of the central bank, the issues related to restrictions on women's rights and other human rights violations, counter-narcotics, the issue of U.S. hostages, also the question of allowing U.S.-related special immigrant visa holders or other affiliates to depart safely, counterterrorism, and entirely last, I think, the issue of an intra-Afghan dialogue. So the third thing I'll note is that a few benefits have accrued from the dialogues, in particular in the area of departures, some humanitarian facilitation, perhaps safety for the UN Assistance Mission, UNAMA. But that's about it. And I think that Special Representative West might be the first to say that there has not been more than mixed results of this engagement. So the new normal is that some of these meetings are being cut off. There is more conditionality that's being discussed. They definitely could go in many directions, including the conversation about whether there should be a U.S. presence in Afghanistan, obviously at a level below ambassador, but that would be some kind of service to populations such as special immigrant interest visas. But there's also a new willingness by the United States, as we saw at the end of August, to allow the travel ban exemptions against senior Taliban leadership that allowed them to go to these international meetings. That set of exemptions expired. And the United States, although it did argue to keep the exemptions in place for travel to Doha only, did in essence allow those exemptions to expire. So I guess what we're seeing is a new harder edge to the engagement. And finally, the last thing I'll say is that U.S. engagement, I think as one official referred to it, the results are not nothing. Well, that's fine. It's a tough brief and tough set of issues to resolve. That would be fine, except if it stood in the way of a better set of actors moving to the front and taking the place of the United States. For example, a more empowered UNAMA fulfilling its mandate to allow greater engagement by Afghans in dispute resolution at a local level, or the UN Human Rights Commission and the Special Rapporteur getting more funding to carry out fact-finding missions, or the UN High Commissioner for Refugees being the lead to help Afghans get to safety all over the world, not just the United States. I could go on. The International Commission of the Red Cross being the ones who strongly take the part of the international community in making sure that humanitarian aid is not diverted. So in other words, U.S. engagement is not harmless necessarily if it takes the place of the U.S. empowering other instruments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. That's very clear, and also really good recommendations. Thank you. I would like to again come back to you at on the question of how we can bring about the settings, the conditions, the environment where we can maybe make progress, or you think that might not be so feasible in the near future. But Dr. Malik Satez, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you. Based on what you heard today, what likely scenarios do you think the people of Afghanistan will face in the next 1 to 2 years? Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me in such an important panel. Mr. Dostiar, it's a very tough question you asked me, but let me try to answer it. During the work that I've done for Afghanistan, my experience has taught me 5 great lessons. The first one is poverty is the mother of insurgent war. The war will continue when you do not provide a better alternative for warriors. In Afghanistan, where 60% of the population is young people under 35, what will happen if there is no work? The second lesson that I've learned, that insurgent groups in Afghanistan are more complex than elsewhere. Here in Afghanistan, war is a dangerous business. The warlordism here has become a powerful institution, coordinating the gun and corruption mafia with human and drug trafficking, which is quite, money laundering process in Afghanistan. The third lesson that I've learned, this is the proxy war. Insurgent groups have complete access to regional intelligence that seeks their interest in Afghanistan. This dynamic relationship between them cause proxy wars in Afghanistan, and it is one of the most dangerous elements in the current situation in Afghanistan too. 4 lessons that I've learned, that Afghanistan is susceptible land for Islamic extremism. The absence of a modern nation state, dynamic civil society, and also an active political and economic sector causes religious radicalism to spread. Unfortunately, radicalism can produce involved terrorists available to insurgent groups. And finally, the fifth lesson that we have learned from Afghanistan, security is impossible without human rights. The foundations of sustainable peace are justice, coexistence, equality, respect for women's rights, and reducing illiteracy. Unfortunately, these cases are not paid attention to in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Afghanistan is an impoverished country. Economic, political, and cultural poverty has caused us to return to the dark period of history. I think, to answer your question, I can imagine 3 scenarios for the political process in Afghanistan. The first one is the bad scenario. The bad scenario means that the world will forget Afghanistan. This country will become a free geography for tourism again. This scenario leads to the spread of wars and casualties. In this scenario, the Taliban will rule over poverty and dictatorship as a military religious regime, and will continue to fight against rebel groups and cause many victims, especially from the poor people. As a result, the Taliban will make the field of Afghanistan more open for cultivation of global terrorism. The second scenario is not a very good one. I will call it the ugly scenario. As of today, the world will not agree to solve the problem of Afghanistan. The military interventions of one of the powerful countries in Afghanistan is late. As a result of this intervention, wars will spread, and the superpowers such as Russia, China, India, and regional states such as Pakistan, India, and Central Asia recruit soldiers from amongst their supporters in war in Afghanistan, which is quite feasible for them. And the third scenario is the good scenario. I think the global litigation and political and humanitarian diplomacy regarding Afghanistan will be more active. In this scenario, hopefully, US will have a better president to solve global problems. US foreign policy strategy towards the region will improve, and the international pressure on the Taliban will increase. This scenario paves the way for the establishment of the rule of law in Afghanistan. Global pressure causes the Taliban to retreat as a religious and military authorizations government, and the ground is provided for the creation of a comprehensive government and inclusive state. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine and the deep conflicts between the countries and the lack of coordination in the region and also among the international community limits the third scenario and made the first and second scenario more favorable. I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saheb. That is that's very comprehensive, and I hope that we see the good scenario coming. And I think that the natural question would be what we need to do to see that. First of all, what are the conditions that are necessary to a good scenario in Afghanistan? And then what steps should and could Afghans, the region, and the US or the international community in general can take to create those conditions? Let me come back to you, Dr. Saib, but I'll just ask this same question from all of our panelists, and would like to start with Ambassador Jawad, if you can hear us. And then Ani, maybe you can follow, and Dr. Sakhi, and then we come to you, Dr. Sakhi. And I've incorporated some of the questions from the audience as well. They are also asking how in all of this we can, how in all of this the status quo is sustainable of engaging and working with Afghans, but not with the regime. How can we, what can we do to create the environment where everybody can be included? Thank you, Ambassador. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dossier. And again, sorry for the technical glitch once again. You're absolutely right, Mr. Dossier. The launch of the political process is an absolute necessity. And to achieve this, Afghans, the regional powers, United States and EU should work more closely. And to accomplish this, the first step is really the necessity for a more positive signal by the US and EU and the region. Unfortunately, and I emphasize unfortunately and regretfully, due to the heavy footprint of the international community in Afghanistan in the past 20 years, most Afghans have lost their sense of self-confidence and self-reliance. And they do look actually to foreign capitals for signals. This is a reality on the ground. It's painful for us, for Afghans to admit, but this is true. And as far as the Afghans are concerned, there is a platform to start, which is we Afghans know what we don't want. We don't want a regime that looks like Taliban. And that is a good point to start working with each other to come up with a platform that what do we want? What kind of regime do we want to see in Afghanistan? And in here, there's room for the new generation of Afghan young leaders to take more leadership. And if I take this step by step to the international community, in case of the US, I think the sympathy for Afghanistan, the regret over the withdrawal fiasco, the kind of gradual disappointment with pragmatic engagement should gradually change to a new direction of policy. Tom West is working on this, but I think he may not get a lot of traction till November, till midterm elections are over in the United States. Here, the Treasury in the United States is a lot more focused because of the terrorism financing issues, but still they have not been able to sort out some of the key issues with the Taliban that relates to the $3.5 billion of funding that is here, and US is willing to release this if Taliban cooperate. The intelligence community are continuing to engage with Taliban, which is necessary, but also they're making sure that the international terrorist group does not actually make Afghanistan an area to roam freely. And in the think tank also have an important role to play, as we can see in this panel too. There are a number of very qualified Afghan in several of these think tanks and institutes and universities all over United States and even Europe. So there's a need for better focus, coordination between them to translate their work into policy changes, and instead of looking at the back and said, what we could have done, what should have done. No, what could be done to change the policy here in the region and in Kabul. And of course, another major player is Pakistan. They seem to be the winner in the war in Afghanistan, but that turned out to be not so true because they lack the financial resources to bankroll Taliban. They are facing serious challenges themselves. The TTP and the history of mistreatment of Pakistanis, especially mistreatment of Kandahari Taliban, will bite them back. And we see that. So Pakistan has to be engaged. Pakistan should look for friends in Afghanistan that are normal Afghans. The Pakistan friends in Afghanistan does not have to be extremist elements and terrorists and killers and other. And that's something that is important to engage Pakistan on that platform. It's the best interest of both countries to, especially in the current situation, that the threat is the same, extremism and terrorism to both countries, to work and coordinate better. And Afghans should take lead on this approach. Russia, of course, for Russia, Taliban were an asset against US and a pressure tool against Central Asia. But there is, as I mentioned, mutual disappointment. Taliban were expecting that Russia will recognize them. They did not. And also Russians are complaining that the counterterrorism cooperation with Taliban is not leading to anything meaningful. So there is mutual disappointment there, and room actually to work with Taliban, because generally Russia has been a country where they supported the most enlightened, the most progressive elements of the Afghan society. The history of Russia working in Afghanistan was a history of building polytechnic and bridges and tunnels and others, not necessarily supporting killers and extremists. So there is a basis there also too to engage Russia in a more positive way. Uzbekistan is getting basically cold feet because they were very much enthusiastic about connecting to Indian subcontinent. In July conference that they put together was a success, to be honest, because they were able to bring US and Russia and many other players in light of disagreement with Ukraine and others. But that conference did not actually result in anything meaningful except for some general statements. And the IMU, Taliban have proposed to Uzbekistan that they move him away from the border to Helmand and Kandahar in these areas, which is a temporary solution, actually. That's not something that will last long. China, again, people were hoping that China would play a big role and bankroll Taliban. It did not happen. Their financial assistance is minuscule. They agreed to the proposal of Taliban to resettle the Uyghur fighters away from the border area because they don't want them back in China. So for them, that's an acceptable proposal. But the behavior of China, again, being in Afghan diplomacy for the past 20 years, it's been always very opaque, very hard to predict. And so therefore, here also, there is low-level engagement, very limited financial assistance, but nothing meaningful that will change the equation. Tajikistan is hosting the resistance and takes a firm stand against it because they have the threat of their own Islamists, and they should also embrace all other Afghan groups. It's important for them not to be seen actually one-sided, and it's a benefit also the Afghan resistance who is based in Tajikistan for Tajikistan to be able to engage with all groups. Iran is an important country. They are on the fence right now, but we have more than 100,000 of Afghan ANDSF fighters there. And they could be mobilized in any way that could be a factor for stability, but could be a factor for instability in Afghanistan, even in the region. And so, but they are concerned about ISIS, they are concerned about Al-Qaeda, and they are not seeing actually pro-Iran Taliban being promoted in the governance, with the exception of the governor of Herat, Zakir, which is a pro-Iranian. There are not a lot of actually pro-Iranian Taliban in the government in the position of decision-making in Kabul or Kandahar. Turkey is an important country to continue to engage. The opposition is based there. There's almost $9 billion of Afghan money in Turkey that has been moved. So they can play an important role. So to conclude, there is a common basis for Afghans and for the region and the international community to start engaging positively and thinking of a direction of changing a direction of policy instead of hoping that the Taliban behavior change. I think this chapter will be over soon. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to, first of all, thank Ambassador Jawad for that amazing sort of recounting of a complex panorama. But I also want to take a different point of view, which is I don't think that waiting for signals from the United States is a particularly fruitful enterprise. And what I would go back to is the only group that can start sort of bringing all of those threads together is the United Nations, that against all odds in March, right after the war in Ukraine had started, the Security Council still managed to put together a very robust mandate for UNAMA. So I think there's something to build on, and it's all we have. I'm aware of all the criticisms of the UN. It's still all we have. I think that the most important condition to set is a framework. What are we trying to achieve? And within that framework is going to be the method of any kind of talks or dialogue. It also is going to have to address the really thorny issues of legitimacy among the participants and the weight of those who can speak who are inside the country and outside the country. It also really should focus on, and I think Mr. Dostiar has done a really wonderful piece for the Middle East Institute, what is the vision of the country? Because that's, I think, a more reliable way to group Afghans than ethnic or rural urban or what they did in the past. You know, there's so many ways that people are divided, but perhaps they could be united on what is their vision of the type of government and society that makes sense. And it will, I think, have to include some of the fundamentalist ideas that the Taliban espouse, as long as that is legitimately part of Afghan society. But it cannot be the kind of vision that is imposed on everyone. Clearly, Afghan history has shown that is a road to instability, as the professor has pointed out. So I think the last thing is the condition of communication and safety. Can people who want to participate in such a dialogue do so? Will they be able to do so remotely? Will they be able to do so without fear of their lives? And what can the United Nations mission do to safeguard the safety of those who do participate?
Thank you so much, Anis. So concrete and concise proposals. Thank you so much. We have very little time, unfortunately, and we have a list of long questions from the audience. May I ask our panelists to maybe limit their responses to 2 to 3 minutes? If we have to go over, maybe we can go over about 5 minutes or so, but again, if you are available to stay. But maybe we can go to Dr. Sakhi and then Dr. Satez, and then we can wrap it up. I do have a few questions I'll try to incorporate as we go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Dostiar. As Annie mentioned, I think there are, and as Ambassador also gave a context of this regional players and actors, I also think that there are two ways to go forward with the political process. One is the internal process, and then another is the external process. As we all know, that Afghanistan conflict and war is multidimensional, and without neglecting any one of them, I think there won't be any concrete outcome. And at this point, I think the United Nations, as Annie mentioned, I think could play a role here to tackle both, because the United Nations is right now active on the ground. It works in different provinces. Per my information, it even managed to reach out to the very remote parts of the country. So I think that's a plus point. That's a condition available right now with the UN presence in Afghanistan. That could be utilized. And the political mandate of the UN can help in reconciliation. I think it can bring this divided, the decisiveness and divided population that we are talking about together through launching a political process. I mean, UN did that in 2002 onwards. It started a process of reconciliation at that time, and it worked well while working with different warlords, different parts of communities and people. It worked well, and especially the regional program that UNAMA had in 2002, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it worked. So I think that could be utilized, the US presence there, and that internal presence of the UN should be utilized in order to launch a reconciliation process through bringing different segments of society together, creating a platform for them to have a dialogue and discussion, and UN can provide that safety as well if it wants. So that is the internal component. The external component, I think that the ambassador highlighted that real politics is engaged there. And of course, we know different countries in the region have the interest of security and economy in the region. I mean, they don't have to do a lot with Afghanistan, to be honest, but Afghanistan geopolitics work very well for them always. Therefore, they do have interest in conflict and peace in Afghanistan. So, and for that, I think many of us have been talking and writing about it, that there should be a regional process. Let's not forget that the past peace processes or political processes of Afghanistan involved the ad hoc meetings of the regional states. Without having an organized platform. We did highlight that a lot in the Doha process. Some of us highlighted even the process in 2010, peace process that happened, that please start a regional process. And that regional process should be consistent to a very organized platform. And I think UN again can play a very vital role here because of the neutrality element, because that was always, even during Doha process, that was an issue. Who should start a mediator role? I mean, which country to step in, which country to lead? US, no, US cannot be a neutral party here. EU, of course not. The regional countries, of course not. So who could play a neutral role? Of course, UN. So therefore, we made a case at that point during Doha as well, that without this ad hoc meeting of Ambassador Khalilzad with different regional states and actors, let's have an organized process. And that organized process could create a continuity, even if the peace process or political process happens or not, that will continue if UN will take the lead. So that was also a case at that time, which did not happen. In 2010, some of us that did not happen. And I think that process still is required to handle this regional complexity that we all are talking about, and to handle that real politic that some are reluctant to carry on and process because of all the interests that the countries have. So I think these two parallel processes, internal and external, could be under this political process that some of us have been arguing to be the next step for Afghanistan. I completely agree there's less appetite because of Ukraine, because of many other global issues happening. But I think there should be a push. And without that political process, pumping money into Afghanistan, that will not gonna produce anything concrete, because let's not forget that social, economic, and political developments are interlinked. And without having a political conditions on the ground, I think the humanitarian aid and the economic development aid will face tremendous challenges for implementation. I stop there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Sakhi. Dr. Sabsitiz, we're all ears to yourself.
Thank you very much. I think that solving the Afghanistan problem depends on two essential elements. The first is a constructive regional strategy for Afghanistan. Although the Taliban considered themselves independent, that's not the case. The Taliban is affiliated with the regional countries, especially Pakistan. A constructive strategy that can unite China, Russia, India, and Iran with Pakistan for purposeful partnership to solve this issue is fundamental. The United States and Europe can support this process, even economically and politically. The Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, can play an essential role in this process. Turkey and Central Asian countries can be instrumental supporter of shaping such a process. I think the world should be better coordinated to solve the issue of Afghanistan and put more pressure on the essential and effective links of Talibanism that lays within the border of Pakistan. The second element, which is very important, is our look to the ideology. We have to include more Islamic experts and religious intellectuals in the Afghanistan political process. We should use the best examples of Islamic societies to build a modern and national government in Afghanistan. In this context, the governments of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Malaysia should play an important role. We must reconcile ideology and strategy in Afghanistan. In my opinion, the above-mentioned Afghan political process needs to take forward 4 important steps. The first one is litigation and advocacy at the regional and international level. This role should be played by the international organizations, as previous speakers told about that, including the United Nations and UNAMA in Afghanistan. The second, raising awareness inside the country. The international community should help the Afghan civil society, Afghan domestic media, Afghan diasporas in the neighboring countries, in the world, in the Western societies. We have a lot of talented Afghan people who can provide a lot of information inside the country through social media and other means. And the third one, constructive coordination between the national and international actors. The world should not invest more than yesterday's warlords and financial mafia. That's enough. Enough is enough. The time has come to the world to invest the young forces inside and outside the country. I think there's a lot of potential, and the Afghan educated young people can play an important role. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabsitiz. Excellent points. I normally summarize the main points, but I think I will not do justice if I try to do that today. So I will leave that so people can watch it maybe again. This will be posted on our website. But I think that there's agreement that some kind of a multi-layered process that involves Afghans, the region, and the international community is necessary moving forward. And there is plenty of excellent ideas on how to do it. A key question is, what is it that we want? And we meaning all of these 3 groups of people that we talked about: Afghans, the region, and the international community. So perhaps we need a visioning process. I think that we can certainly have follow-up conversations on this. I would like to thank everybody who took time to join us today, and all of you distinguished panelists for your expertise that you so graciously shared with all of us today. And I also want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Lisa Schirch. She has been a pioneer and an excellent supporter of the Afghanistan program at the University of Notre Dame. Lisa Gallagher, who helped us put together this event, and Hannah, and also Director Erin, and my colleague, Dr. Nilofar Sakhi, and all of you. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, who is a partner to our program, for being with us. And so thank you all. I wish you all a great day. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you.